Hello, I'm Susie. This is my podcast. Today, thinking a lot about work. Work is the thing we all got to do. We love it, we hate it, we hate to love it, we love to hate it. But it's an essential thing, right? You got to bring home the bacon. You got to put food on the table. You got to provide. So, it's something we all have to do. Moreover, I would also suggest that it's an internal drive as well. There's something spiritual in work. I believe that many Americans have an unhealthy relationship with work. There's sort of a two-sided coin there. On the one side, there's kind of a privilege workaholic. I'm identified by my work style of work obsession. And then there's a sustenance sort of survival mode on the sort of on the disenfranchisement side of the scale, where you might need to work, 3 and 4 jobs just to make ends meet. So there's a lot of disparity in how work features in individual people's lives. And I find that interesting. And I think that there are reasons for that. So I'd like to talk about them and also touch upon, where I hope work is going to go. It's not going anywhere, right? As aforementioned, it's essential. It's part of, the basic need systems of people's lives. So how do we create a more balanced, healthier way to make sure people have work and can survive without having to destroy themselves in the process, either through misguided notions and privilege or through inequity needs from disenfranchisement? Where do you go? So I'd like to talk through that a little bit, and I hope that you will join me. So stay tuned. As mentioned, I think that a distinction can and should be made between sort of the idea of work as a function of human expression and labor, which is more of a political distinction. And the two are obviously inextricably linked, right? We have sort of an ideology, which, work can function in pretty freely. And then you have the idea of labor, which is, more of in my view, a commoditization of human beings. And that has functioned in, a lot of different frameworks throughout history. Very interestingly, I had prepared much of this episode just in terms of, the shape of it and what I was thinking. And a couple of days ago, there was an amazing development in New York, where Amazon workers finally have been successful at forming a union after much and very aggressive pushback from Amazon. So I'm very excited about that, and I understand a lot of people kind of cringing. I can sort of feel a certain segment of listeners like, oh, why would that make you happy? And it makes me happy because I think Amazon is abusive, and I think that they are, very firmly standing on monopoly turf, and they are treating their labor resources as many monopolistic corporations have a tendency to do, which is they see them as, expendable. They're whatever it takes to increase their profits. And so they're prioritizing profit over human life. And that's wildly problematic. It's not even like something I feel like needs to be explained. But when you say it out loud, I think there's a business sector mind that's like, yeah. And, and I just think you should examine that, you should examine that. If that's your instinct of like, well, sure, I mean, you got to make money, but again, if you're prioritizing the money over the lives of the people who are helping you get that money, yikes, wow, that's just, I mean, it's almost hard to like put adjectives like around that in a way that, it's so awful. Like I just kind of like don't even have words for it. It's because it's, I guess to me it amounts to kind of a modern day form of slavery. It's that like disrespectful to a human being's needs, basic needs and rights and their dignity as a human. It's disgusting to me. One of the many reasons why I, buck against capitalism, because capitalism as a rule, tends to commoditize human lives, in it's so many ways, not just through labor, through like environmental impact, through regulatory lobbying, just a lot of different facets that corporations and capitalist systems manifest their desires over the needs of human lives for the purposes of monetary gain for a very select group of people. And I'm a little bit on a riff here, but I'm going to go there, which is, that's one of the really core problems of this idea of American exceptionalism, this idea of the American dream that we, all of us, if we work hard enough, blood, sweat, toil, you can get there. You can achieve the American dream. Like, give me a break. It's so obviously not the case for so many people. And I'm not just talking about people of color or immigrants or, other like disenfranchised people. If you're poor, if you were born poor, if you were born into like a manufacturing town where the, economy has shifted away, you too will struggle to make your ends meet and to find a foothold in capitalism. I understand the defense derived from American exceptionalism. I can understand why people would want to take that position. It feels good, it feels noble, but it's not based in reality and therefore is doomed, to fail. It's based on a flawed premise and therefore, you should probably just, take a broader view, take a bigger look at how America has formed itself, who has been able to make it and who has not been able to make it, and the reasons why. And a lot of those American exceptionalism ideas that are based in capitalist principles of, the American dream and streets paved with gold and, all that stuff that the immigrants found to be very, very untrue. I think generational Americans, people who have been here and who have struggled through generations of poverty. And, that's a stark reality that I think we don't really want to take that close a look at. It's hurt. It hurts to look at that, especially, when you're just like Joe citizen and, what can you do? Right. Like it feels like too big a problem. But I think, let's talk about that. Let's figure it out. Cause I think that you'll see it through the spectrum of history that, there has been major changes. Obviously, we think we all know that in our DNA. And so, but the changes to from where we are now to where we were are like, whoa, like astronomical, considering the way the world works, right? Technology has liberated, so many people. And that is hopefully a trend that continues. It's now working, I think, on a more micro scale. And so that can be really frustrating. So, yeah, as per usual, I like to sort of break things down beginning from a platform of historical context. And this time will be no different. I'm going to do that a little bit in a moment. I'll kind of talk about, and again, my focus is America because I'm American and I don't have a specific experience of working or living in another country. And so obviously I can't really identify. And I feel like it would be presumptuous of me to, talk about other countries. And even in a historical context, I think you can sort of talk about that. These things happened, but then as a as an informing feature of how that historical framework informs a current day society within another nation, that is not something I feel qualified to speak to. So I don't intend to. But I do feel fairly qualified to speak as an American, even though America is a huge country full of like an enormous amount of people. But I'm going to take that liberty because I've lived here my whole life and I've thought a lot about it and I've studied a lot about it and I think a lot about it. That's why I have a podcast, honestly, because I don't really have any other place to put that since I don't work as an academic. No regrets. I mean, no regrets about that. But again, it's sort of a bummer to have all these surplus thoughts like and no place to put them. And this has been a liberating experience for me. So I really hope you've enjoyed it as much as I've enjoyed making it. So yeah, hang out. I'm going to talk about the history of labor in America. It's going to be it's really cool and interesting, exciting. I know I usually say like it's going to be hot, like in a kind of an ironic way, but I mean it. It's hot. Hang out. Alrighty. So, thinking about labor throughout history, I think, as per usual, I love to start with the Egyptians. Again, they're sort of they're one of the first memorialized cultures. Like they wrote a lot of stuff down, they documented, it was important to them to memorialize, and they had the means and they were very advanced and could do it. So there's a lot of documentary evidence surrounding, the Egyptian culture as sort of one of the manifestly first human dynastic societies. And the Egyptians felt really totes like okay about slavery. It was just part of their culture. But the difference being, it had a different flavor to it. In essence, it was as a dynastic society. There was an elite class ordained by divinity, typically in the pharaohs, but there were also there was a noble class, right? There were the viziers and the court attendants, and obviously the women of the court, the wives of the pharaohs, and then there was a working class, and the working class wasn't like paid labor, like they didn't but there were elements of that. So first of all, slaves were of all races, they came from everywhere. It was more class based than it was anything else. And there were also scenarios where like peonism and other structures where slaves could buy their way to freedom. They could buy other slaves into freedom, and they had some a form of rights. They could have property rights, and as a rule, families weren't separated. Family units could continue to live together and stay together, and that is the modality that slavery had taken up until the colonial periods in the 16th, 17th, 18th century. Slavery became more of a European based market, and it became a mechanism by which colonial imperialistic frameworks could increase the resource base. Now, remember, England during that period was the most powerful nation on earth. England, they're a tiny little island off the coast of Europe, right? Like just like little bitty England. They had the biggest, most badass navy at the time. They defeated the Spanish, who were thought to have the greatest armada, that would ever be seen on Earth, and the British Navy just eviscerated them during the time of Elizabeth I. So that colonial period, and Elizabeth, was she had hawkish tendencies, and she also had a legacy in mind, and she was very eager to go out and figure out what land was out there that they could kind of stake ground on and say, ours, dibs. The Flemish were doing it, the Spanish had been doing it for a long time. So now that they've got this great navy, hey, let's get out there. And they sure as heck did. And they subjugated a lot of countries where the majorities were people of color. Obviously Africa, but, not just like India is a really good example of British colonialism over into Asia, parts of China, though they did a pretty good job of kind of like pushing back. They had that wall going for them. That was a good move. Again, I could go on, but the idea of slavery, it had a solid foothold in Europe because of Rome. Rome, as a culture, was also very much like on board with slavery. It just was part of their world, and they had similar structures as the Egyptians did, where it was a working class. It was less, I mean, they were slaves. They were, obviously abused and had forced to live in horrible conditions and poverty and etc. But there was a class of rights that was afforded to this working class. But when colonial Europe kind of cornered the markets on slaves in the centuries that followed, it became race based, which was new. And it also became, in the American manifestation of slavery, a vicious chattel system that didn't regard labor as, it was like a cow. It wasn't a person. It wasn't an entity endowed with consciousness and sentience and like an idea of its own rights. It was a cow. So like hard to think about that, and how that legacy still lives on deep, like as this deep seed in some people's minds. It's there, lurking, that this person is a cow. That's not a real person. And it's scary because it has a shadow existence that people barely recognize it in themselves, oftentimes when they're experiencing that. It's terrifying to me. Anyway, I digress. So, again, slavery in America was just wow, really bad. And it went on for 400 years until a certain segment of people, white people this time, were like, hey, maybe this is wrong. So we had a big war about it, and the Union won. And subsequently, there were amendments passed that abolished slavery. It was P.S. the first mention of slavery in the U.S. Constitution, because up until that point, it was presumed that it was part, a legitimate part of the economic, system. It was just baked in. So the first mention of it is its abolition. 14th and 15th Amendments also supplying, rights of citizenship and rights to vote and things like that. But one of the things that the 13th Amendment did was it also qualified that citizenship, and it qualified the abolition of slavery, that if a person is convicted of a crime, they then can be used as slave labor, basically, convict labor. And that became a really lucrative system. In fact, it was one of the, kind of very first, the fuck am I trying to say here? Convict labor, that system, it was legitimized to the extent that, again, because it allowed a certain class of individuals to continue to deal with these people as though they're cows, then it becomes codified, right? Because it's under this legal framework. Or what it's not slavery. I mean, they committed a crime, like they deserved it because it's the law. Well, okay, but what if the crime was, you played checkers with a white kid? There was a law against that, apparently. What if your crime was you didn't stand up fast enough, when a white person passed by? Um, what if your crime was being accused of something that you didn't actually do, but a white person said it and you don't really get the right to argue back? So it's just like ostensibly true. Is that an act that's worthy of, condemnation of your human dignity? I would argue it's not. And I think the legal system in general currently would also argue that it's not, given the subsequent, legal frameworks that have followed. But that's not what we're here to talk about. So yeah, convict labor was a problem, and it was basically the flavor of American capitalism, which began as a slavery-based system. American capitalism grew healthily and heartily through slavery before we were even a country. First of all, the slave market itself was just enormously lucrative. I mean, lots of people made fortunes just trading slaves, and did so with perfect impunity, even when after Europe and Britain in particular was like, ugh, enough with slavery, this is real bad. They did that long before the US. And the US just continued on as though slavery was a completely legitimate way to do business. So much so that once again they, codified it into another form of economic system that was much more easily justifiable because it was, presented in the framework of the Constitution in a very specific way. Congratulations, capitalism. It's sneaky and really it's a canny system, which is I think why it has lasted so long and continues to go completely unchecked. And I'd like to just say, generically speaking, that I am an anti-capitalist in its current manifestation, but I'm not against the idea of capitalism, like capitalism in the sense that there's equity, capitalism to the extent that there's equal access, right? Like I believe in that American exceptionalism ideal. I just don't believe it's ever existed in reality in the United States, not, or at least not, universally. It's sort of, existed in a mitigated, qualified way for a certain, type of person, but it's never been an equal, all you can eat buffet situation for every American, right? You have to, a lot of us, for one reason or another, have to do, a lot more hustle to get up, to the same basic level, and then from there it's triple the work, to be acknowledged as an equal, if you're ever acknowledged as an equal. And that's rough. That's that's not a cool, awesome burden to carry. And again, I think just speaks to the manner in which work and labor inform our identities and our lives. And if you are a person whose historical background is that you have been, for really no reason of your own making, right, by virtue of your existence, and something characterizing your existence, you are sort of put into a category, and this category will sort of ascribe your value. That category will kind of tell you how far you can go. It defines your limits. What? That's stupid. That's just stupid. I'll just say it right out loud. That's stupid, and I don't agree. And I think that it's, again, it's very baked in to American thinking because we struggle so hard with the idea that the American exceptionalism that we've been told is just manifestly true is just a big lie. And that the people who, don't have it easy really are just not trying hard enough. They're not working hard enough. They're just not doing enough to, that's why they're lazy. They just, they don't bring their A game. They expect handouts. They have lots of excuses for why they can't do things at the level that you think they should. You see what I mean? Like there's all kinds of judgments about that person's life that have nothing to do with them as a person and their own ability, their own demonstrated, merit or qualifications. It's kind of about, who you think they are as a person. This sack of characteristics that you've handed to them and been like, these are yours now. They didn't make that. You did. Like society made that. Like handed it to them. Now they can't put it down. Like they were like, can I put this somewhere? Like, I mean, and now people are pissed enough they're just dropping it where they stand. Like, fuck that. I don't have to be what you tell me to do. I don't have to be what you tell me I ought to be. That's crazy. This is my life, my identity. I love that. I am here for it. Like the more people do this, the more other people will see that it's their right to do it. And that just sparkles to me. That's exactly what we should be, right? Like that's why I'm excited about America, because we do have the space to do that. It's rocky, it's ugly, it's gross, but it's more often than not, it's successful. Revolution, like a small amount of revolution can really create conversation and awareness around what was driving that revolution, whether it's a revolution on the left or a revolution on the right. They're scary. There are moments of turmoil that force people to be like, "Holy shit, what just happened?" And then look at it kind of closely and be like, and then we get lost, right? We get lost in the propaganda and the rhetoric, and the conversation becomes muddied. Nevertheless, there's still conversation, and through that conversation, a few things, do I think pass through the net that catch that people kind of connect to and be like, yeah, that's, ooh, yeah, okay, I get it. That's kind of fucked up. Like that's progress. It might not be the strength of progress that people are impatient for, but I just think that's a factor of human cognitive, psychological processing. It's not a fast thing to just switch somebody over and be like, think differently. It's hard. It's hard to think differently if you've never been asked to do it. There's more. Hang around for a sec. One thing I want to kind of point out that I find really interesting is that I feel like, Americans have this weird history of always sort of yearning for an aristocratic class. There seems to always be this desire to create a new nobility class, a class of people who are sort of dominant from a wealth perspective and who amass, what we would consider to be like generational wealth, and then the children of those people and how they then manifest themselves in the world and the presumption of their generational wealth and all that, all the privilege that it entails. Those things are very reminiscent of English aristocracy, up to and including sort of the exploitation of labor under a feudalist system or a serf based system that had existed in England, up until the Middle Ages, up until the Renaissance period, really. And that's not to be dismissed. I think there's a show on HBO right now, actually by Julian Fellows, who did Downton Abbey, which is an excellent show. I love Downton Abbey. That's just good. It's good soap opera television. It's good, clean fun, and I also kind of appreciate the restrained sort of viewpoint of the death of the aristocracy. Right, like he was sort of showing the softest fall possible in that show for the aristocracy, which I have opinions, but whatever, they're not important. But this show, The Gilded Age, is about just that, the Gilded Age, and I think it's timely. I think that he's doing it because we are currently kind of in a new sort of Gilded Age where these monopolistic corporations emerge, and single people garnering an obscene amount of wealth and subsequently an obscene amount of influence over the political processes that allow them to preserve and protect their wealth, and abuse their workers and exploit labor, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. When Teddy Roosevelt had a big part in kind of course correcting our country, I I really wish we had a Teddy Roosevelt right now. I don't know who that person is in our politics right now. I feel it in Elizabeth Warren, but she lacks the egotism and the maniacal confidence of a Teddy Roosevelt, who had a very bull in a china shop way of getting things done. Bernie Sanders has that quality somewhat, but Bernie Sanders is difficult for a lot of people to take seriously, I think. Some people either take him like really seriously or not at all seriously. And So you know, that's too charged. It's too charged. It's all about the personality now, and it's not about his politics, which is, I don't think that's what he wanted, but anyway, opinions about that, but I digress once again. In any event, I obviously have uh, some resistant feelings about the rise of a new aristocracy. Ugh, no, thank you. Eat the rich. Like, I don't want it. I don't want any piece of it. And a lot because aristocracy depends on a rigid notion of tradition, which means that we observe practices and customs just cuz people did it before. And that there's just no good that could come of that. You should be examining your actions, and if they don't make sense in the current context, you should not do them. Tradition be damned. Right? That's how I feel about that. Unpopular opinion alert. Nevertheless, the aristocracy in America exists, not really under that name. I'm not a fan of it. I think you've gleaned that by now. But I think it features prominently in our lives, and that'll be a little bit what I talk about next time when I talk about the Industrial Revolution, that Gilded Age that we were just talking about, and that Julian Fellows is representing so beautifully. OMG, that show looks so good, you guys. I mean, if you're into set piece, period stuff, and you like Julian Fellows, like this show really is the American Downton. It's quite good. I'm a big fan. Actually, I really really enjoy it. I hope they do more. So yeah, I hope you'll join me in the next part. Thank you so much for listening. I gotta tell you, I'm very appreciative of some of the feedback that I have gotten from people. I'm very grateful for that. I mean, I'll be doing it regardless. If you like it or not, but preferably it would be cool if you like it. That would make me really happy. And also engagement makes me really happy. So if you like it, I hope you'll share it. Let people know who you think might enjoy it. I love dissenting viewpoints, when they are considerately stated, and well thought through. So I invite dissenting comments as well as assenting or consenting comments. I have an email. You can reach me at Susie Makes a Podcast. That's SUZI Makes a Podcast at gmail.com. You can also find me on Instagram at Susie Makes a Podcast. So yeah, come on back and listen in the next part, and I'll be talking then, and you'll be hearing if you're there. Until then.